Greetings, everyone. I am the Eggman. Can I say that on YouTube without getting taken down by an AI copyright detector or something? See, this is the problem with internet names sometimes. You join a forum for modding a particular game as a teenager, and name yourself after a song lyric by this obscure little band you might have heard of called The Beatles. Because haha, look at me being clever and unique, right? But then it turns out that not only have other people listened to a few songs off Magical Mystery Tour, there's also some dude named Eggman in this obscure little game you might have heard of called Sonic the Hedgehog. So it's actually a pretty common username. But at least within this particular modding community you've joined, you're the one and only Eggman, so you managed to carve out a small name for yourself with a handful of custom maps and unfinished projects before life takes you on new journeys. And now, it's 20 years later in the era of social media and content creation, when you decide to re-enter the modding scene for a new game, only to find that there are hundreds of other Eggmen out there. There are even other established egg-themed creators right there in your chosen game's community. So, you need a new name, something catchy that hasn't already been taken across half a dozen different platforms and doesn't inadvertently violate somebody's copyright. Give me a minute, I'll be right back. Greetings, everyone. This is Eggman's temporary username, and today we'll be in City Skylines. Oh, see, it's no good. You can totally tell that I wanted to name myself Eggman, but it was already taken, so then I'd have to, add numbers to it or something. Well, whatever. I'll just make an account called temporary username on Paradox Mods so I can upload this map, and I'm sure I can change the name later to match whatever I end up calling this YouTube channel. No big deal, right? Greetings, everyone. Rambling Teacher here, and today we'll be in City Skylines 2 with a tutorial on detailing with terrain paint. Oh yeah. That name is much better. I'll go with that one. It feels totally on brand for me, because I like to think I'm pretty good at explaining things, but I also like to go off on tangents while doing it, a whole 3-minute long skit about usernames on the internet or whatever. So yeah, anyway, what were we talking about? Detailing with terrain paint. Basically, I want to show you how I did all of this detailing in this map here, using just the base game terrain painting tools that were added in the 1.6 update for City Skylines 2 a few weeks ago. When that update came out, there were plenty of videos by lots of other talented people showing you the basics of what the tools do, and then there's plenty of other people showing off really impressive things with doing custom textures and all that. But I haven't seen a lot of people dig into just how much you can do to detail with the base game tools as kind of a replacement for decals and surfaces and everything we had to do before this update. So this map as our backdrop is Sheboygan, Michigan, which is a map I had started working on right when that update released. It is on PDX Mods. If you want to check it out, I'll put a link in the description. And so here I am, deciding to show how I did all of this. Everything I'm going to show you in this video can be done entirely with base game tools. I have absolutely no mods installed right now. We'll take a look through the map at all the different detailing that I did, and as we do that, I'll show you the techniques I used to accomplish it. You'll have to forgive my janky video editing as we go along, by the way. I do actually have prior experience with teaching people things through the internet, talking to a computer in a room by myself, hoping that somebody is there listening on the other side. But that was under very different circumstances. This is actually my first time trying to cut together a video more for entertainment purposes. As I worked on all the detailing for this map, I settled into a design philosophy of implied detail. So that is to say that at a glance, at a distance, it gets the idea across of whatever I'm making. So we get the idea of a plowed field. We get the idea of an area that's recently had its trees cleared out. We get the idea of an area that's being primed for some sort of development. With without being overly prescriptive about forcing a player to build exactly what I think should go there. So if we zoom in, the illusion breaks down. There's not as high fidelity as if I put down a million custom decals and props and surfaces and such. But this way, it's very easy for the player to build over or replace or erase as they see fit. So let's say I am somebody who doesn't want to do a lot of detailing. I just want to add in a base game farm here and be done with it, and keep the details that are already there in the map. So we'll just draw in a road right over that dirt track. No problem, because there's no props or surfaces there. And then we'll add in our farm field right over the top of all this terrain paint. I usually play with Anarchy installed, so it is very painful to make a field this small, but we get the idea. And you can see I just go right over the top of all that terrain paint, no dealing with Anarchy, Better Bulldozer, etc. to get rid of existing surfaces. And a really neat thing is that these terrain paints even peek through the base game farm textures a little bit, so you still get some of that detail there. And actually, let's extend this over the track a little bit. You'll see even the dirt track goes through it. Doesn't look great, but it's there. Or maybe I want to build some sort of neighborhood over here. You can just build your roads right over this. And let's imagine that maybe these tracks here are the sites of future roads. So we'll just put those in. Follow the tracks. Put in some cul-de-sacs. And there we go. I communicated to player, hey, maybe this would be a neat idea to do, but they don't have to do that. If they just want to instead say that this area is going to be, how about a fish farm? Well, they can do that. And just go right over the top of it. No worries at all. And then if they change their mind later, delete it. And all that detailing is still there. Or maybe you are the type of person who is a hyper detailer. You want to do a whole bunch of work with decals and surfaces and all of that in addition to the base game terrain paints. Or maybe you even want to do custom textures yourself. Well, since this is all just terrain paint, it is super easy to get rid of. All you do is erase it. Now, before we get into how to build any specific type of detail, it's important to understand how the different textures overlap and interact with each other. So let's zoom into these fields we just cleared out. You have 4 textures that you can work with. So you have dry, lush, dirt, and sand. When you're mixing these different textures together, they're not actually really mixing the way that paint would to create a new texture. They're really acting more like layers that are going on top of each other. So your base game grass here, that is your base layer. Everything else will go on top of that. And then let's put down the dry texture. Now if we're staying at 100% brush strength here and we put the lush material over that, you don't actually get any blending there. Since that was at full strength, it just went right over the top of this. The only spot where you're going to see a little bit of blending is right here on the edges of the brush. And that's because that's where that blue area is. So there's a little bit of transparency there to fade out. Whereas this pink area in the middle, that's at full strength. So then let's put dirt over top of that. And then sand over top of that. And let's go a little bit smaller right in the middle here over everything. So they always overlap each other in that order, assuming you're working with the base game stuff exactly as it is designed without changing it at all. Now, if you do want to start blending things, that's where you'll want to play around with the brush strength and the brush type. This is something that is also available alongside these terrain textures. Now you have more than just the default brush. Some of my personal favorites are the mountains brush, and then the noise 2 brush, which is not available in regular gameplay. It's either part of the editor or maybe extra terrain tools. I don't know for sure. But the tendril brush is similar to that. So, let's actually stick with this tendril brush right here. I'll bump up the size so you can see it. So you can see here, we don't really have any of that pink area in here with the tendril brush. So let's go back to 100%. If I paint with this one, you'll see it gives a much gentler touch. And that allows you to start blending things more. And we can see like the dirt texture gets a bit more patchy, as well as the sand. So this lets us get more subtle details. Or if we go to that mountains brush, the reason I like this one is that you do have some of those pink areas there to get it, going at full strength, and you have some of the transparency around the edges, and you have some completely empty areas. So that can give you a more patchy effect, or those lines, like right here, especially if you're moving at different sizes. And there we go. When it comes to things like the shoreline texture that's generated where water is meeting your terrain, or the snow texture that is generated when it snows, those also do act as layers. I haven't done a lot of testing with these, so I'm kind of doing this in a spur of the moment here. But as far as I can tell, that shoreline texture doesn't get covered up by the dry texture, or the lush texture, or the dirt texture, but it will get covered up by sand. Which means that you can create all the beaches that everybody's been very excited about with this update. But also with the sand, it seems to only do that if you're at 100% strength. So let's bump this down, and you'll see that the shoreline takes over the sand. Until we get back up to around 95%, and that gets this patchy look. So use that as you will when you're creating beaches. So you can see over here, I embrace the patchiness a bit because we're in Sheboygan, not the Caribbean. So we want things to be a little bit rockier, a little bit dirtier, not, pure white sand everywhere. And snow, meanwhile, will just cover up everything. So in this map, if I let the climate go through the winter, it does snow in this map. And the snow looks a lot better now with the updates to lighting. It's not as miserable to play in winter anymore. But snow will cover up all of the grass, all of the terrain paints, and it will even cover up this gravel texture under the shoreline, under the water, so this would all turn into snow. It actually doesn't look that terrible in these shallow waters. It almost gets across the effect of ice, to my mind, from a distance. Again, implied detail here, embracing that kind of lack of fidelity, just to get the idea across. Now, back over to those fields we were in a little bit ago. Let's give ourselves a blank slate again. And we're going to use these as a little canvas to work with as I show you how I made all the different details in this map. So let's start with farm fields. We're going to knock the brush size down a little bit and adjust it as we go. So farm fields are where that mountains brush comes in really handy. You could probably do this with some of the other brushes, but the key is that you want something that will allow you to give the appearance of lines as you drag your brush around. So if we go treating the base game grass as the base, you can get different effects with the fields depending on what textures you use, and generally you're going to need to blend some of them together. This lush texture here, with the way it works in game, I feel like this gives the appearance of the ground being kind of wet. It's a little bit darker than I might prefer, really, for the idea of a farm. But you can see, if I'm dragging my brush and use straight lines, it kind of looks like the effect you would get in a field that has been planted or plowed. And now, we can use the dry and dirt textures to go under it or over it in different ways to get slightly different effects. So let's take that dry texture. I could stay on a mountains brush and go in lines again. That gets us, a nice idea of it. Kind of enhances that effect of being plowed. Or let's erase that quickly. If I use that tendril 2 brush from earlier, lock up that size. That gives us a more even effect, but it's a little bit more gentle, so you still get some of that green grass poking through there. Erasing with brushes like this with a lot of transparency doesn't work too well. It's good for really subtle detailing, but you'll want to go to the default brush to get rid of things quickly. As for dirt, keep in mind this goes over the grass, so if we stuck with this default brush at 100% strength, that doesn't really do anything for us. So I like to knock the strength down. Let's see how that does with the default brush. You can see that gives us some patchiness there, like maybe this is a field that's not planted with anything. Or if we want to give the appearance of just a few specks of dirt here or there, knock that down even further. And that gives you that really gentle, subtle look. Let's put back in some of that dry texture underneath. Clean up our edges a little bit. And there you go. That looks kind of like a field that has been planted, been plowed, but has a little bit of dirt still poking through in places. Next up, let's take a look at forestry. Now, when it comes to just general large forested areas, what I will do is use that lush brush on the mountains brush at a reasonably large brush size, whatever I need to cover the area fairly quickly. Not necessarily at 100%, that's a little bit overly intense, I think. But I'll take the lush brush and go underneath most of my forested areas. That helps with easing the effect of tree LODs. So as the trees start to fade out, especially if you have a camera mod installed that lets you zoom out farther, you still get kind of a dark green appearance there, even if the trees are starting to disappear. And it helps your forests kind of have the appearance of having more trees than they actually do. So like if we go down here at full strength, that darkens the area a little bit, and it helps disguise the fact that the trees actually aren't as dense as a real forest would be. As for areas that have been deforested, having the trees cut down, this is a matter of mixing this lush brush with dirt and arid texture just in different ways than the farm fields. So we're going to recreate some areas like this back over at our blank fields that I have lost. Here we are. So let's put down, nope, not sand, that dry material. Put down a bit of that using our good old mountains brush. And now with the lush brush, rather than going in straight lines like that farm field, let's make it kind of splotchy. Whack up the strength here and there. Maybe change the size. You can even rotate brushes using that tooltip that shows up. Airplane. And that can help sometimes depending on what you're doing to keep the brush not looking so uniform, not so tiled. Now let's put a bit of dirt in here, again being careful about brush strength. By just spamming that around a little bit more, it gives the effect that this is not a field being worked, but instead this is a wild area that has been cleared out. And then we just can put a little bit of foliage over top of it. For this map, I used bushes to do that. So it would keep the appearance of looking like, smaller trees and plant cover. Not worrying about tree growth or anything like that. But you can detail things as you see fit. So you can put down wild bushes. At whatever age you want, we can select the age of trees now in a base game too, which is very nice. And plop those around. Or we can even add in some young trees, like saplings. And there we go. That kind of gives the idea that that area's been cut out, but there's still some smaller things growing there. On to Marshes Wetlands. Let's go take a look at one of those that I have in the map. So I mentioned that the lush texture gives the appearance of the ground being wet. So we're going to be working with similar idea here to that forestry area we just built, just using less dirt, essentially. So let's zoom back over there. And we'll build in this one right here. This time, with our dry brush, we'll keep the strength pretty low, and let's stick with our mountains brush to get that splotchy appearance. Let a little bit of the base grass texture poke through, and then go over that here. And personally, I feel that if we don't put any dirt in there, or not much, it kind of looks like there are puddles there from a distance. And then from there, we would, dig out streams or areas for water. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll just grab our default brush now. Get the terrain height there. We'll knock it down just a few meters below that. Let's try 10. And clear out an area there. Let's smooth it. Let's say this is, a little depression in the ground where water collects and pools. We just go over that a little bit more with our lush brush. And we kind of get the appearance that there's water pooling there. Next up, let's move on to small streams, the bane of existence for anyone who has ever tried to add water sources to them, because the game really does not handle small water sources well at all. So I'm of the opinion that it's not worth the trouble to try to do that. Even if you do get water running through it reliably the moment you zoom out, the water would disappear. So when it comes to detailing them, before we had terrain paints available, you would have to do surfaces all throughout it, which is incredibly tedious. Or you could use decals and networks that are available on PDX mods. Lots of wonderful options there if you want a really high level of detail. But with terrain paints, we can now, again, give the impression of water running through here without requiring people to subscribe to a bunch of mods to use the map. For the sake of example, showing how I did this, I'm going to erase all of these textures, and then we'll recreate it. And you'll also see how the updates to the lighting system in the game and how it handles terrain really help here. Before this update, most likely all of these subtle differences in the terrain here would be practically invisible without turning contour lines on. But now we can see it even without any texturing to it. So the texturing here is just to help give it a little bit more definition. What I do for these is, like a lot of things, I start with a dry texture. And we're going to bump the size here down to about 40. I happen to know this stream as I was digging out a little bit more from what was in the height map data. I used a size 20 brush for that. And then smoothed it out. So 40 will give us a little bit bigger than that. And the reason for that is that this dry texture is going to be our base that helps blend it in with the grass. And let's also bump down the brush strength to about, we'll say 50. I usually keep it somewhere around 40 and 60 for this, I believe. We'll turn on contour lines to help out with this. And we'll go all the way down. And we are going to continue this through the trees, all the way to our river. Next, we're going to take the lush brush, and we'll keep this also at about 50%. We'll see how that does. But we're going to decrease the size here. Let's go to about 20. And then we'll go over that. And we can see, especially if we turn off the contour lines, that kind of gives the effect of this being a stream bed that's a little bit more wet. So it's still grassy. It's essentially a drainage ditch running through a field. But that's all we want. We don't need to actually simulate water here. We just need the appearance of it. So we'll keep that going. Even with the lighting updates, it is helpful to have contour lines for this. All the way down through the trees. Sometimes as I'm going through trees here, since I'll already have this lush brush under the tree cover in more forested areas, it can be helpful to increase the strength a little bit. So that way it still stands out against any forest brush that I might have around it. Now, last step that you'll see that I do in some places around the map. This isn't a great example because there's trees there. Let me find another stream that is uncovered. No, not that one. There's one around on this side of the map somewhere. Here we go. So sometimes with streams, I'd also add in just a little speck of dirt here and there. I found that if you put too much, I think there's even a little bit of sand there. If you put in too much, it just covers up all of that lush texture. So we want just a small sprinkle of that. So let's go to dirt. Knock the strength down even further. And rather than drag or brush the whole way through, we'll just do very small bits of it to get just that tiny little bit there. And there we go. Now we have the appearance of a very small stream, maybe a seasonal stream, or, like I said earlier, drainage running through farm fields. If you want to add a little bit more definition to it, you can also add foliage to it, which you'll see I did over here. We have some plain streams, and then on this one I added some bushes. Not necessarily realistic, the bushes would be growing straight in where the water would be running, but implied detail. Next up, let's take a look at dirt tracks. You'll see I've added these all throughout the map for different purposes, maybe suggesting the path that farm equipment has taken to get through the fields, or construction equipment getting sites ready to be developed, or giving the idea that a dirt road continues off without actually drawing out the road. So back to those fields we've been making. Obviously, we're going to use the dirt texture for this. We'll stick with the default brush. We're going to take the size all the way down to 10. And for the brush strength, somewhere between 100 and 90 is where we're going to start. So let's tee off from the road here. Take a track in. And then as we want it to taper off, we just reduce the brush strength a bit. Now let's turn in here. And there you go. Now it looks like, for some reason or other, somebody drives through the field there. Now, one thing you will very quickly notice if you're doing this is that it only really looks right if you're going in a perfectly straight line. You can even see here I deviate a little bit and it takes a sharp turn over there. And then the texture gets very jagged or squared off on the edges as you go. That'll look more clear if I go somewhere that doesn't have all this grass texture there. So let's go to one that is already down over here at a diagonal. and you can see those jagged edges. So that's just a consequence of working with small brush sizes with the way that the textures tile themselves. The way that I try to mitigate that is to just put yourself at a kind of a low brush strength, still at that small size, and just do another layer of this and try to fill in those gaps there. And that can kind of give the appearance of softening the edges. It's not going to be perfect. You'll find places where you just can't quite get it right. But that's okay because it still keeps up the appearance, and people are going to be building over that eventually, one way or the other. When it comes to beaches and shorelines, it would be really easy to just take a sand brush, full strength, and just dump sand everywhere and call it a day. But that's not going to get a very good look, as we could see right there. Not great. We want to have some blending with the grass and some splotchiness where there's more rocks and pebbles going on, since this is the Midwest, not the Caribbean or a tropical paradise. We'll take our sand, we'll head over here to an empty area of the shore. Let's go to that mountains brush, and let's take our strength down just a little bit. Now, this is not going to interact with that shoreline texture at all. This is to get our blending with the grass. And I'm doing a lot of clicking here, not much dragging. Let's bring the strength down a little bit more. Now, if we want to start to cover up that shoreline texture like we talked about earlier, we need to be at 100% strength. But I don't want to keep the brush very big because down here underwater, I will want to go back to that splotchy texture. So let's drag right along here. Since we're using this mountains brush, this will be a little bit time consuming and fiddly, but the end result should be a more detailed look. Let's also see what happens if we vary our brush type a little bit. There we go. So now we've got that bit of blending going on where we naturally progress from grass into a more heavy sand area and then into some of the rockier texture under the water. Let's go back to that mountains brush, move our size back up a bit, and finish up down here. Might need to move the size up a little bit more. And you can continue that out as deep as you need to in the water. I have a pretty gentle taper going on here, but I didn't go all the way down into the deep section because I felt that that's enough. So now with all that very specific detailing done, things like farm fields and dirt paths and all that, one of the last steps I would take is doing a pass over the map to put in some general variation in the ground texture. Things like this in the shoreline where I went over it at a very low brush strength with that dry texture or dirt texture. That gives the appearance here of it maybe being some lower land that at high tide would get covered up by water, or maybe once upon a time in the past the sea level was a bit higher. Or you can see in other areas, there's just a little bit of general variation in the grass texture, again, to make it look a bit drier here, because the real world is not just one big flat green texture. So let's go over to one of our emptier fields where there hasn't been much of that work done. We'll work right here. We'll take that dry texture, and we want a brush that has a lot of transparency to it. So we'll take that tendril brush. We're going to bump up the size pretty high because we're covering a very large area. But we're going to take the strength down a bit lower. Let's try about 65%. And we're just going to go in one big path here, maybe squiggle around a bit. It's very subtle. It might not even show up with YouTube video compression. But there's just a bit of difference in the color of the grass there. And if you need to vary it a little bit more to get rid of any obvious path that your mouse might have been taking, maybe, we can erase instead. Let's use the mountains brush for this. Stay at that kind of low brush strength. Take the size down a bit. And just erase in a few places. Again, it might be hard to see on a video, but that gives a little bit more variation there. One last detail that honestly is a little bit over the top, but I did it anyway, was putting just a little bit of a dry texture under every road and track and power line running through the map, with only a few exceptions for things like this here that I think a player would be very likely to delete. So that helps just give a little bit of definition. Because the edges of roads and tracks in the game have this very sharp edge, you're never going to completely fix that. But from a distance, it helps soften it just the slightest bit. Another fun thing about this is that if a player does decide to delete all the roads and tracks or something, there's this bit of a ghost there of that, because in the real world, if you had a railroad track running somewhere and then you tear it out, the grass there isn't going to be as healthy. So that gives a little bit of a sense of history for players who want to keep it, and if they don't want that there, if they want to completely make it their own, then they can just erase it. Now, as for how I actually accomplish that, simple enough. Let's go over here to this dirt track right here to work on it. We'll erase first to then redo it. So dry texture. For the brush size, I keep it just a little bit bigger than whatever network I'm working on. So since this dirt track is pretty narrow, let's actually go to 30. Now I'll give just a bit of color to the edges. We'll stick with the default brush and take the strength all the way down to, let's try 30 and see how it does. Drag that down. That is maybe a little bit too subtle. So let's try bumping it up to 40%. And I think I'm happy with that. It's present enough that you can see it if you're looking for it, but it's not distracting. And if you need to soften these edges even more, you can always go at an even lower strength. And create a gradient of sorts to really blend it out. Well, I hope this video has been useful for you. If you'd like to check out the map that we've been working on, it is on PDX Mods, Sheboygan, Michigan, uploaded under my temporary username name. But you know what? I've really enjoyed putting this video together, and I think I'll stick with this new rambling teacher persona I made just to upload it on YouTube. So, one last thing to do, I should head on over to PDX Mods. Let's update that username to match this so people can find me, and